Nathaniel sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on the flickering screen of his old comms device. It was an antique, passed down from his grandfather, who had once worked for the early space exploration programs. Nathaniel had always thought of it as a relic of curiosity, nothing more. But tonight, as the glowing text on the screen shifted and warped, he knew something was terribly wrong. The message was brief, but its implications were enough to send a chill down his spine. The letters, though scrambled, spelled out his name, and the strange symbol at the end of the transmission flickered ominously before vanishing. He reread it over and over. "I journeyed across galaxies for you, but you won't be ready for the truth." His mind raced. Who would send him a message like this, and why? Nathaniel wasn't anyone special, just a 28-year-old tech analyst working for a space logistics company on Earth, living a quiet life in the sprawling city of New Alexandria. He'd never left the planet. He had no connections to anything bigger than his simple existence. The transmission had come from an unknown source, its coordinates unreadable. As he sat frozen in place, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, a low hum filled the room. His eyes snapped to the window. The sky outside had darkened with the heavy clouds of an impending storm. But there was something else, something unnatural. A flash of light, a starship, impossibly large, had broken through the atmosphere and hovered silently above the city. Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen anything like it. The craft's design was sleek, unlike any military vessel or commercial freighter he had seen in the news. It didn't belong in Earth's skies. Before he could even process what was happening, the ground trembled, and a loud thump echoed from the direction of the landing bay. A soft, mechanical voice crackled through his device, urging him to stand by. Panic shot through him. His hand hovered over the comm device, unsure of what to do next. There was no way this was a coincidence. The message, the ship, the eerie feeling settling over him, it all pointed to something bigger than he could comprehend. Suddenly, the comm device beeped again, this time with a signal so urgent it felt almost like a command. A new message appeared on the screen. This time, it wasn't just text, it was a video feed. The image flickered before stabilizing, revealing a woman's face. Her features were striking, her eyes sharp with an intensity that sent another shiver down his spine. She was looking directly at him. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "I've come for you. But be warned, the truth is a far greater danger than you can imagine." The feed cut out abruptly, leaving Nathaniel in stunned silence. The woman's face lingered in his mind. Who was she? And why did she know his name? His apartment door suddenly slammed open, and a cold gust of wind filled the room. Something was coming for him, and he wasn't prepared. Nathaniel barely had time to react. His pulse hammered in his throat as he turned, looking for the source of the gust of wind that had blown through the door. He froze. Standing in the threshold was the woman from the video feed. She was tall, with a regal air that seemed at odds with her apparent urgency. Her black leather jacket glistened under the dim lights, and a strange, glowing insignia on her collar flickered faintly. Her hair, dark and straight, hung just past her shoulders, and her eyes, those penetrating, impossible eyes, stared directly into his soul. "You're Nathaniel," she said, stepping forward with an almost predatory grace. Her voice was calm, but the tension radiating from her sent a wave of unease through his body. "We don't have much time. They're coming for you." Nathaniel stumbled backward, his heart racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman, Ilara, as he now knew from the message, took another step forward, her gaze never leaving him. She seemed unfazed by his shock, as though this meeting was inevitable. "I've been looking for you across the galaxy," Ilara said, her tone shifting to something softer, almost apologetic. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to listen carefully. There are forces at work that—" Suddenly, there was a deafening noise from outside the apartment. The sound of boots hitting the concrete, voices shouting, and the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Nathaniel's eyes widened. "Ilara, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his pulse quickening as the noise grew louder. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her hand moved to her waist, and from beneath her jacket, she drew a sleek, metallic device that hummed with energy. She pressed a button, and the door slammed shut behind her with a loud bang, sealing them inside. She gave Nathaniel the quick, calculating glance. "They're here," Ilara said simply, "and they'll do whatever it takes to get to you." Before Nathaniel could ask more questions, the apartment's lights flickered and went out. A dark, hollow silence followed. Then, from the hallway outside, came the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. He turned to Ilara. "Who are these people? Why are they after me?" She gave him a sharp look. "We'll talk later. Right now, we need to move." Without another word, she reached out, grabbed his arm, and pulled him toward the window. Nathaniel barely had time to process what was happening before Ilara opened the window with a fluid motion and ushered him onto a fire escape. "Stay close," she urged, her voice tight as she pulled him down the metal steps with urgency. As they moved lower, the hum of approaching spacecraft grew louder, the sound of engines tearing through the atmosphere. Nathaniel's mind was reeling. He had no idea who these people were, or why Ilara was so intent on protecting him, but the intensity of the situation left him with little choice. He stole a glance at her. "Who are you really?" Ilara glanced back, her face unreadable. "I'm the one who's been sent to protect you," she said, her voice softer this time, though no less intense. "And the truth is something you won't be ready for, but you'll have to face it, whether you want to or not." Nathaniel didn't have time to respond. A shadow passed overhead, something big, and the chase was on. The fire escape creaked beneath Nathaniel's feet as he followed Ilara through the dimly lit alleyways. They moved with purpose, as if she had mapped out every step long before she'd arrived. Her movements were quick and precise, her eyes scanning the surroundings with the precision of someone who had lived 100 lives. Nathaniel tried to keep up, but his mind was racing, overwhelmed by the events unfolding around him. "What's going on, Ilara?" Nathaniel panted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Why are they after me? And who are you really? You're not telling me everything." Ilara didn't break stride, but she gave him a fleeting glance. "You're right. I'm not telling you everything, Nathaniel, because you're not ready for it. But you will be." The words stung, but Nathaniel couldn't argue. He knew she wasn't telling him the full truth, but what choice did he have? She had saved him from something far worse, and the gravity of the situation was beginning to sink in. If he was caught by whatever or whoever was hunting him, he didn't know what would happen. Suddenly, a loud crash sounded from above, and Nathaniel looked up to see a dark silhouette darting across the rooftops. A sleek, metallic ship hovered just above the buildings, its engines humming with a low, terrifying whine. He felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. Whoever was after him, they were relentless. "They're getting closer," Nathaniel said, his breath catching in his throat. "Who are they?" Ilara's jaw tightened. "The Veil. And they've been hunting you for years." "The Veil," Nathaniel repeated. "What does that even mean?" "I don't." "There's no time," Ilara interrupted, cutting him off. "I'll explain when we're safe. Just trust me." They turned a corner into a narrow alley, and Ilara stopped abruptly in front of a nondescript door. She pressed her hand against a small panel on the wall, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Without a word, Ilara ushered him inside. Nathaniel stepped into a dimly lit room, the air cool and sterile. The door sealed behind them, and he heard the sound of it locking into place. As they stood in the silence, Nathaniel's eyes took in his surroundings. The room was sparse, filled with high-tech equipment that looked far too advanced for anything Earth had developed. It looked more like a command center than a hiding place. Ilara moved quickly to one of the panels, her fingers flying over the controls, and a holographic display flickered to life. "There's no time for explanations right now," she said. But you need to understand something. You're not just a normal human. You never were. Nathaniel opened his mouth to protest, but Ilara raised a hand, silencing him. You're part of an ancient bloodline, one that ties directly into the fate of entire galaxies, she continued, her voice low, as if afraid of being overheard. Your DNA contains something unique, something that the Veil is desperate to control. Something that could either save or destroy every living thing in this galaxy. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. What? How is that even possible? You're just Nathaniel. Yes, Ilara said, her gaze sharp. But that's not who you really are. You're more than that. Before Nathaniel could respond, the room suddenly shifted. The walls vibrated as an energy pulse sent a jolt through the air. Ilara's face turned pale, her eyes darting to the console. They found us, she whispered. The door burst open with a violent crash, and figures cloaked in shadow flooded into the room, their faces hidden behind helmets. The Veil had arrived. Nathaniel barely had time to react before the first of the Veil agents raised a weapon toward him. Ilara moved with lightning speed, her body shifting in a blur as she tackled him to the ground, just as a pulse shot past where he had been standing. Move, she shouted, her voice harsh and commanding. Without waiting for him to respond, Ilara grabbed his arm and yanked him to his feet, pulling him toward the far corner of the room. The agents advanced, their weapons humming with deadly energy as they locked onto their targets. Nathaniel's heart raced in his chest, but he could barely think. His legs felt like they were made of lead as Ilara dragged him toward a small hidden doorway in the back. Another energy pulse grazed his arm, and he winced in pain, but there was no time to dwell on it. Ilara was already pulling him through the door and into a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The walls around them vibrated as the Veil agents continued their advance, and Nathaniel could hear the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the metal floor. Ilara's expression was tense as she dragged him further down the hallway. Who are these people? Nathaniel asked, struggling to keep up. Why are they after me? And why the hell are you protecting me? Ilara didn't slow down. You have no idea what they're capable of, she said, her voice low and urgent. The Veil is a dark faction that has spread its influence across the galaxy for centuries. They've infiltrated governments, corporations, entire worlds. And now, they've come for you. But why me? Nathaniel demanded, a sinking feeling gnawing at his gut. I'm just a guy, an average guy. I don't have any special abilities. I'm not anything extraordinary. Ilara paused, turning to look at him, her face softening just for a moment. You are extraordinary, Nathaniel. You just don't know it yet. The weight of her words hung in the air as she continued pulling him forward, but before he could ask more questions, a loud crash echoed behind them. The Veil agents had breached the door. They were closing in. Keep moving, Ilara ordered, her voice sharp. They reached another door, and Ilara quickly accessed the controls. But just as it began to open, the hallway behind them was flooded with bright light. Nathaniel's instincts kicked in. Before he could fully comprehend what was happening, he felt a surge of energy, and a force he couldn't explain seemed to come alive within him. It was like a deep, primal power, something raw, uncontrollable. It surged through him, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The Veil agents stopped in their tracks. Nathaniel's body pulsed with an unfamiliar energy. His eyes widened as the walls of the hallway shimmered with light. It was as if the very fabric of reality was bending under the force of his presence. Ilara looked at him, wide-eyed, a flash of recognition crossing her face. You've unlocked it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Nathaniel wasn't listening. The power was too overwhelming. His fear and confusion mixed with the raw energy coursing through him, and as he raised his hand instinctively, the walls around them exploded outward in a burst of blinding light. The agents screamed, their weapons disintegrating in the blast. And then, in a heartbeat, everything went silent. The hallway was gone. Nathaniel stood in the midst of a scorched, ruined space, his chest heaving with the exertion. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. He hadn't done anything, had he? Ilara looked at him, her face a mix of awe and concern. You did this, without even knowing how. Nathaniel stared at his hands, still trembling. What am I? More than human, Ilara said quietly. And that's why the Veil is hunting you. Because you could destroy everything. Nathaniel swallowed hard. It wasn't just his life at risk anymore. The fate of entire worlds could be in his hands, and he had no idea if he was ready for that responsibility. Nathaniel's breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the remains of the hallway, still dazed by the power he had unleashed. His pulse thrummed in his ears, and for a moment, he felt like the world around him was spinning. His hands trembled as he tried to steady himself, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. Ilara stood a few paces away, her gaze fixed on him with a strange intensity. Her expression was a mix of admiration and concern, as though she was seeing something in him that even he couldn't grasp. You're not just human, Nathaniel, she said quietly, her voice uncharacteristically soft. You've always been something more, and this power, the one you just tapped into, it's only the beginning. The words hit him like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Nathaniel's voice was hoarse, his mind struggling to catch up. I'm just a normal guy. I work in tech. I don't. You're the descendant of a line of ancient beings, Ilara interrupted, her voice sharp. The power you just tapped into is from an ancient race that shaped the balance of the entire galaxy. You have the ability to manipulate time, space, and reality itself. But it's not just about power. It's about what you choose to do with it. Nathaniel's stomach churned. Manipulate time and space. That sounded like something out of a dream, or a nightmare. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. I don't want this, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I didn't ask for any of this. I don't want to be some weapon. Ilara's face softened, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. I didn't ask for it either. But it's the truth, and you need to understand. This isn't just about you. The Veil, the ancient orders, they know what you are. They want your power, and they'll stop at nothing to control you. Nathaniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. The weight of Ilara's words hit him like a ton of bricks. But I'm not ready, he whispered, almost pleading. How am I supposed to handle this? I can't even control it. What if I hurt someone? Ilara stepped closer, her expression softening, her voice lowering. The question isn't whether you can control it. It's whether you'll choose to. The Veil wants to exploit your abilities for their own ends, to use you as a weapon of mass destruction. They'll manipulate your fear, your doubt, until they turn you into something you're not. Nathaniel swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to face what he had become, and he wasn't sure he ever would be. But the reality of the situation was clear. If he didn't make a choice, if he didn't learn to control this power, the Veil would use him to reshape the galaxy in their own image. Ilara. Nathaniel began, his voice shaking. What happens if I can't control it? What if I end up becoming the monster they're afraid of? Ilara reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. You won't. You're not them, Nathaniel. You're the only one who can stop them. You have to believe that. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. There was no turning back now. He was part of something bigger, something ancient and terrifying, and his decision would shape the fate of the galaxy. Are you ready to fight for it? Ilara asked, her voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the shattered remnants of the hallway. The Veil would be back soon. He could feel their presence, like a shadow looming just beyond his reach. He closed his eyes, his thoughts swirling. The path before him was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He couldn't run anymore. I'm not ready, Nathaniel whispered, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'll fight. For Earth. For everyone." Ilara gave him a small, knowing smile. That's enough. The first step had been taken. Now, there was no turning back. The silence in the aftermath of Nathaniel's decision hung heavy in the air. His heart was still pounding in his chest, and the overwhelming weight of what lay ahead threatened to suffocate him. He wasn't ready to face the power inside of him. He wasn't sure he ever would be. But the veil was out there, waiting, and there was no escaping the path he had chosen. Ilara's steady presence beside him grounded him, but even she couldn't hide the tension that pulsed between them. They both knew that the veil wasn't far behind. Every moment they wasted gave their enemies time to catch up, and Nathaniel could feel it in his bones. The hunt was on. "We need to move," Ilara said, her voice low and urgent. "Now." Without waiting for his response, she turned and motioned toward a hidden passageway in the back of the room. Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, his eyes lingering on the wreckage left by his uncontrolled burst of power. The walls were scorched, the air heavy with the stench of burning metal. It was a visual reminder of the kind of destruction he was capable of, and the thought terrified him. But he had no choice. The veil would come for him, with everything they had, and he needed to learn how to control the power within him before that happened. He followed Ilara through the passage, the narrow corridors winding deep beneath the building, far from the city streets above. As they moved, the flicker of distant lights from hidden security cameras and holographic screens illuminated their path. Ilara knew the way, and Nathaniel could only trust her guidance. "How far are we going?" he asked, his voice still shaky. "As far as we need to," Ilara replied, her tone grim. "The veil will be tracking us soon. I've set up a temporary safe house, but it won't hold them for long. We need to reach a more secure location." Nathaniel swallowed hard, his mind racing with the questions he hadn't yet voiced. Why do they want me? What do they hope to achieve by controlling me? Ilara stopped abruptly, turning to face him, her eyes dark with an unspoken weight. She didn't answer right away, and Nathaniel could feel the tension rise. "You're more important than you realize," she said finally, her voice soft, but filled with conviction. "The veil believes you're the key to something they've been searching for centuries. Your bloodline is tied to the Heartstone, a powerful artifact that can rewrite the very fabric of reality. Whoever controls it controls the future of the universe." Nathaniel felt the air go cold. The Heartstone. He'd never heard of it. But the way Ilara spoke, like it was a force of unimaginable power, made him uneasy. "And the veil wants to use me to find it?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Exactly." Ilara's gaze sharpened. "But you're not just the key to unlocking it. You're the one who can destroy it, if you choose to." Nathaniel felt a shiver run down his spine. Destroy it? Could he really do that? If he did, would that make him the villain? Would he be condemning the galaxy to darkness? But the veil's not the only threat, Ilara added, her eyes narrowing. There are other factions, worse ones, that would do anything to take the Heartstone. If the veil gets their hands on it, they will unleash a war like no one's ever seen before. You're the only one who can stop them, but it's going to take everything you have. Nathaniel stood in stunned silence, his mind reeling. He was caught in a storm he had never asked for, a war of cosmic proportions that he didn't even understand. His past life, his quiet, safe existence, was gone. In its place was something far darker, and the weight of the galaxy's fate now rested on his shoulders. He looked at Ilara, her eyes steady and unwavering, as she watched him. "I'll do whatever it takes," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening with resolve. Ilara gave him a nod of approval. "Then let's go. We don't have much time." With that, they continued down the labyrinthine corridors, the threat of the veil looming ever closer, and the weight of the Heartstone's power pulling them into the unknown. The tunnel stretched on endlessly, winding through the depths beneath the city like a vein, carrying them away from the danger above. Nathaniel's legs burned from the relentless pace, but he refused to slow down. The fear gnawing at him was too strong, urging him forward. Every step he took felt like a step deeper into a world he didn't fully understand, one that seemed to devour everything in its path. But now, there was no turning back. Not after everything Ilara had told him. Ilara led the way, her movements fluid and purposeful. She was a woman with purpose, someone who had known this path for far too long. Nathaniel could see the weight of the mission in her eyes, but there was something else there too. A kind of dread he couldn't quite place. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a hidden chamber, far from the bustling city above. It was a sterile, cold place, lit only by faint blue lights embedded in the walls. At the center of the room was a pedestal, unadorned and simple, but standing atop it was a shimmering object that hummed with an otherworldly energy. The Heartstone. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat as he saw it for the first time. The stone was a deep shade of violet, glowing softly, its surface rippling like the surface of water disturbed by an invisible force. The energy around it was palpable, almost suffocating, as if it was alive. And yet, as he stepped closer, a strange sense of recognition washed over him. He had seen it before, at least a version of it. The power that had surged through him when he'd unleashed his abilities, it had felt like this. Like the stone itself was somehow calling to him. "Ilara," Nathaniel whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "This is it, isn't it? The Heartstone." "Yes," Ilara replied, her voice quiet, almost reverent. "This is what they've been searching for. And this is what you were born to protect, or destroy." Her words sent a chill through Nathaniel's spine. He could feel the weight of them pressing down on him. This stone could rewrite reality itself, as Ilara had said. Could he really destroy something this powerful? Did he even want to? He reached out a tentative hand, but the moment his fingers neared the stone, a surge of energy shot through him, sending him stumbling backward. The air crackled with power, and for a moment, Nathaniel thought the stone had come alive, reacting to his presence. "What happened?" he gasped, struggling to steady himself. Ilara's expression was unreadable as she moved closer. "It's testing you. The Heartstone recognizes you, Nathaniel. It's trying to see if you're worthy." "Worthy?" Nathaniel repeated, incredulous. "Worthy of what?" "Of destroying it." Ilara nodded slowly. "The Heartstone is not just a weapon. It's a choice, and it only responds to those who are connected to it. Your bloodline is bound to it. But the question you need to answer is whether you will use it to destroy or to preserve. The Veil would enslave the Heartstone, bend it to their will. And if they succeed, nothing will stop them." Nathaniel's head spun with the enormity of the decision before him. He could feel the pull of the stone, the temptation of power. But was he ready to make such a choice? To wield a force capable of reshaping the galaxy? "There's no time for hesitation," Ilara said, her voice breaking through his inner turmoil. "They'll be here soon. You need to decide." Nathaniel stared at the Heartstone, the air heavy with its potential. The entire universe could change with his decision. And for the first time he realized he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something much greater. For freedom, for balance, and for the future of everything he knew. "I'll protect it," Nathaniel said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. "I won't let the Veil take it." Ilara's gaze softened, but there was still a sharp edge in her eyes. "Then get ready. This is just the beginning." With a final, determined look at the Heartstone, Nathaniel knew that whatever happened next, he wasn't just running from the Veil anymore. He was running toward something far bigger, a destiny that had been written long before his birth. The fate of the galaxy rested in his hands. The weight of the Heartstone hung in the air like an unspoken promise, a burden Nathaniel could no longer ignore. Every moment of hesitation felt like an eternity, each heartbeat a reminder that the Veil was closing in. The soft hum of the stone reverberated through the chamber, a subtle vibration that seemed to sync with his own pulse. It called to him, as if it were alive, as if it were waiting for something. A command, a choice. Ilara stood a few paces behind him, her eyes never leaving him. She knew this was the moment. She had always known this was coming. But Nathaniel, he was just a man thrust into the storm, unprepared for the enormity of his destiny. You can feel it, can't you? Ilara's voice broke the silence, calm and steady. The Heartstone is more than power. It's a reflection of you. It will take whatever you give it, whatever you choose. Nathaniel turned toward her, his face pale but resolute. I don't have a choice. If the Veil gets their hands on it, they'll tear the galaxy apart. Ilara's expression darkened. You're right. But remember, there's another side to this. You can destroy it, end its power for good. Or you can use it to reshape reality. To change things, to make them the way you think they should be. But you have to be careful. The Heartstone doesn't care about morality. It doesn't care about right or wrong. It just is. And once you use it, you may never be able to undo what's been done. Nathaniel took a deep breath. The weight of the decision pressed on him, suffocating him. He thought about Earth, about the people he loved. He thought about the threat of the Veil and the other factions that would do anything to control the Heartstone's power. If he allowed it to fall into the wrong hands, nothing would ever be the same again. But could he really destroy something so powerful? Could he truly erase an artifact that had the potential to reshape entire galaxies? The sound of distant footsteps echoed in the hallway. The Veil was almost here. Nathaniel knew they would stop at nothing to claim the Heartstone. I'm not going to let them control it, Nathaniel said, his voice hard, his gaze fixed on the stone. But I'm not going to destroy it either. There's another way. There has to be. Ilara's gaze softened, understanding what he meant before he even finished speaking. You're not going to use it for your own gain. You're going to protect it. And you're going to protect the galaxy from those who would abuse it. Nathaniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in his chest. He stepped forward, hands trembling, but his resolve firm. With a deep breath, he reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the Heartstone. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through him. Raw, untamed power flooding his senses. For a moment, everything went white. He saw visions, futures, possibilities, and endless choices. The weight of the galaxy's fate pressed on him, and he realized what he had to do. With a single thought, Nathaniel closed his eyes and sent the Heartstone's energy surging outward, locking it away, shielding it from those who would use it for their own gain. A barrier of shimmering light enveloped the stone, securing it in a place beyond reach. A place where only those who were worthy could access it. And with that, the Veil's reign of terror was halted, for now. When the light faded, Nathaniel stood, chest heaving, his mind exhausted but resolute. He had made his choice. The Heartstone was safe, but the battle was far from over. The Veil would come again. But Nathaniel knew now that whatever happened, he would stand ready. He wasn't just protecting a stone. He was protecting the future. Ilara stepped beside him, her voice low and proud. You've made the right choice, and together, we'll keep it safe. Nathaniel nodded, looking out into the dark corridors ahead. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy had a future, and he was going to make sure it wasn't shaped by those who would destroy it. The journey had only just begun.